is presenting his contraband on the internet for all to see. It seems inadvisable, but I'm looking forward to it. Zach, what have you got, man?
Share my webcam. Give me ein Moment bitte. Come on, computer. And what we have is, okay, webcam. Sorry, y'all. There we go. All right. What we have is a Contra bassoon reed shaper. It's a prototype. This allows you to shape a piece of cane. I'll talk about what that is as we get through the pictures. But it's a step in the process of making the reeds or the mouthpieces for the instrument, which is the best instrument that ever has existed. It's a big, farty bedpost that costs like as much as a car. Let's go to the first picture. I can't remember what
order. You must be a bassoon salesman.
So my process for this was step one, to do a bunch of measuring. I presented this like about a year or so ago at the beginning of the pandemic, a whole bunch of ideas, but I measured some other shapers that I have for bassoon and expanded this to match a Contra shape, which just fits piece of cane. In here, it's curved on the end, so you, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you see a little curve. The piece of cane itself is curved, so you clamp it in there. It's this little piece of about 142 to 150 millimeters wide or long, and it comes from a piece of grass. There are a bunch of them in a tube, and you split it and then gouge the inside. It clamps inside this guy. You run a knife blade down the side, and you get a piece of shaped cane. But in order to make it, I don't have several $100 and CNC machinery yet. So I had to get mine 3D printed, and I have to be very careful with the knife blade, but I can do it pretty consistently. Anyway, in order to make it work, I needed to have it the ability to clamp. So I had to make this clamping. This was my first attempt. I used, you can barely make it out on the little mini mill. That's a threaded, I forget the name for it, but it allows a machine screw to go inside of a coarse threaded adapter that you screw into a piece of wood or plastic. And I was trying to drill that out a little bit wider so I could let the screw glide on one of them, but have it grip into the other one to screw down so it can act as a clamp. However, I ended up shredding this one, so I ended up just keeping the picture as a sad memory. Going to the next slide that's kind of toasted. This was me mounting it in the milling machine. And I as you can tell, it's not square, it's not really flat. So the only way to mount it was to squeeze this way, obviously putting the bottom on some parallels in the vise. And then I used strips of wood that I promise I removed, Billy, and vacuumed out. But I shoved little thin strips of wood from the scrap pile in the thinnest wells until the thing was gripped solidly in all places. Then I used the edge finder to find the edges, the edge finder to find the widths, and found the centers of where I wanted to drill. And I think that's the next pictures, where I started drilling in the specific locations. That's the edge finder still mounted in the collet at the top of the Bridgeport. The first hole is drilled on the left. All the way through, I went very slowly. And if you peck drill with a drill bit, even if the piece is not mounted perfectly flat, if you peck drill, the drill will not wander as much. It will continue to bias down the width of it, but the tip will continue to drill down and make a straight line hole. So I just kind of tap drilled and peck drilled all the way down. And the next picture, I think, is the next hole drilled. Yes, with the same drill bit. It took about an hour to do this whole process. The next picture, I think, is the whole thing laid out. Okay, to make that work, I ended up, like as I said, I let go of the brass thing because the wall was too thin. But what I did was I took a roll pin, I think is the name of it. It's a piece of steel. It's like a drinking straw, but it's just a piece of steel that's rolled over, so it's like this. And there's a gap down the side that's meant to compress when you shove it into a hole and tap it in. So I just took that to I put it in some vice grips, took it to the metal bandsaw, the big tall one, and cut 2 little cookies of it. Then, yeah, roll pin, that's it, Billy. Then tap that down into the holes at the top, and that allows the top portion to slide on those roll pins. If I just drilled the hole small, and allowed the screw to rest on the plastic, it would eventually shear it and the piece would just get all wobbly. So I shoved a roll pin in there. Anyway, the next picture I think is the whole thing put together. That's all the pieces that I used. The brass inserts are at the bottom. That's right before I screwed them into the bottom part. However, I did not do a good job, and this is, as you can tell, it's not perfectly straight. Just first time mistakes. It does clamp pretty flat, but I have to be pretty careful when I cut. And I think the next one is, oh yeah, this is a great picture. Those were convenient. They were only a couple bucks at the home center, so they're in the specialty hardware section. I just went through and I typically go like, what can I use on this project? And kind of just like pick through the drawers. Those looked really good and found the right hex head screws to go with it. Next one I think is the whole thing kind of clamped. On those, it's just no strength. And this is what it looks like with a piece of cane clamped in there. And you just take the knife and bias it on the side, and you can't, oh, my camera's backwards. And you just run, there's a technique to cutting because oh, come on, camera, it's like patting your head, it's backwards. There's a technique to cutting because if you just cut straight across, you'll lose this portion. So you have to like cut like this back and forth. Anyway, part of the process, but that's the tool. I don't think there's another one. I think that's it. Yeah, okay. This is on the table with the piece of cane finished and my dirty fingerprints all over it.
And so
that's what it looks like.
As somebody who knows nothing about this, I'm assuming that the shape then of the reed that you're creating is particularly key in it making the sound that it makes. Is that right?
Very. We go by like tenths of a millimeter accuracy on those sides, sometimes hundredths. For oboe reeds, it's down to the hundredth of a millimeter of accuracy down the sides of the shapers. And they're very expensive, hundreds. My good ones are 125 to 250 bucks, and I have 3 or 4 different ones that I use for different kinds of reeds. But yes, as you can see with that cane, it's kind of like an hourglass shape. Well, you do what's called profiling, and luckily I already have some profiled cane here. It goes on another machine. It carves the bark out. It's this versus this. This is just gouged. They're both gouged, but this is profiled. The bark has been taken off in a very accurate fashion. You do that to that one, then you fold it. And you get the typical hourglass shape down the sides. So a bassoon reed or an oboe reed is made with one piece of cane that's folded versus 2 pieces that are stuck together.
And so this precision that you're speaking of, is that in an effort to try and get a consistent sound from one reed to another? Is that the idea?
That's it. All the areas of that shape determine different things: pitch, tone, control. Yeah. How it fits on the instrument. The bottom is flared, so it fits on the little tube. Yeah. I don't know much about it. I'm trying to learn, but it's so esoteric.
Well, I just learned a bunch. I had no idea. That's fascinating.
Yeah, buddy.
Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate you sharing that with us tonight.
Yeah.
All righty. Next up, we've got Tim, who has apparently brought some wooden toys to share.
Okay, you can go ahead and go to the first slide.
All righty.
These are some wooden toys that my uncle and I made whenever I was a very young child. I can't remember when, but it was somewhere probably around 8 or 9. And I don't actually remember that he had any specific plans that he went by. I think he just kind of ad-libbed it as he went. But I learned a lot of woodworking from him, and I've seen ones that were very similar, since then, but he didn't have anything setting out that I saw. So I'm not sure if he had plans that he just wasn't showing and was trying to impress me or what. But so obviously this is a train, and he turned the smokestack and the little caps that would normally be covering the steam sections on top of the boiler. I think the rest he actually just used like wood with a hole saw and things of that nature to actually make the boiler section itself. I think the next photo's got a side view of it. That's the entire train, and then I think I've got it set up to where you can see the individual pieces. But this, I'm not really even sure how long it took, because it's been so long ago that we made these things. It was just something that I did with my uncle and enjoyed the woodworking experience. If you can go to the next picture, please. But this is a better shot of the train itself. You'll have to excuse the dust. It's been sitting where it's sitting for quite a while now. But the wheels actually move. If you push this thing along, everything you see there that looks like a mechanism actually does work, including the small stick that goes into the front section where the drive would normally be on an actual steam locomotive. Everything actually works. You can go to the next one. And again, everything on this, it actually will roll. They do link together from the dowel rods that you can see holding them together. And if you can go to the next one. And we just built several different ones, for this very nice little set that he put together. And I learned quite a bit of woodworking from him at the time. Of course, this is so long ago, I don't even think that at that time we would have been doing our show and shares with those little Polaroids, and shaking them. You can go to the next picture, please. And I think, if I remember correctly, and by looking at it, it's actually held together by dowel rods, because the top of this actually comes off, so you can put stuff in it if you wanted to. And if you could go to the next one. And you can't see it, but there's actually a bell in the caboose that will ring as it's rolling. So that was a pretty neat little thing that he did on that one. And if you go to the next one. And then we made a couple of planes. This one and the next plane, obviously, they're going to look very similar. This one I'm going to have to rebuild the propeller on because over the years it got snapped off. But again, it's the same, or very similar prospect. We turned several pieces on it and then used a bandsaw for several others, sanded everything down, and just assembled it as a nice little toy that you can have. You can go to the next slide. And basically the same plane, but this one's actually made out of walnut and oak instead of I think poplar and pine that the last one was made out of. But these are fun little projects from long ago. I think that might be it for the photos. Yep.
Man, that was an incredible nostalgia bomb for me. I hadn't thought about it in forever, but I had a wooden train set when I was very small, and boy, I sure wore that thing out.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you played with a lot?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and he actually had a much simpler version that was the one that you would actually get out and play with. That one was the more, the more fancy, kind of almost a display version of it. I mean, back then, with the limited stuff that he had to work with, I think we had a bandsaw, a table saw, did have a drill press, and a really old Sears lathe, which I would actually probably classify it more like a lathe-like object instead of a lathe. But it can do it. The chuck was a 3-jaw chuck that each jaw was independently, moved. So it's not unlike, I guess, a one that ended up with a metalworking. The traditional woodworking lathes, all the jaws would move together, but on this one they would not. So if you wanted to turn something offset, this is a fantastic chuck to do it with because you could never get that thing lined up right.
Right.
Yeah, it was 3-jaw independent. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Each jaw had a screw that you had to tighten down in order to lock it in place. And this was for woodworking. He said he had stuff come out of that thing, more times than he can count. So he would usually just try to, put it between centers and turn things as a spindle. He didn't really like playing with the chuck very much. But in a lot of the stuff that we did here, you actually had to use the chuck because, like the little thing that holds the propeller on, for instance, that had to be turned in the chuck because you couldn't turn it between centers and actually finish the end. So.
Oh, yeah. All right, brother. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us tonight.
You're welcome.
Next up, we've got Joe, who I don't know what that means. Crank Yank is the name of his presentation. Let's find out.
Well, that's actually, I started getting into fly fishing when I moved down to Tennessee, and I invented my own fly pattern. As far as fly patterns go, there are some really not PG-13 names for a lot of these flies out there. So, you know, like if your kids catch the innuendo of mine, well, that's your fault, not mine. But anyways, this is the fly that I made. And the idea was when, for those of you who don't really know, when you go fishing with a regular rod and reel, you wind it in, and there are things that give action to your lure. When you're fly fishing, usually you strip the line in. It acts like a rope that you're pulling on more than you're reeling it up all the time. So different things give your lures different action. But with crankbaits for traditional fly fishing, they have a bill on them like that. So as it goes through the water, it gives the bait a wobble. A lot of the flies that I've made use this craft foam stuff to make fly parts out of it, make it look like different bugs and stuff. So I started using it, and I figured, well, maybe I could do something like this, and it turned out working out pretty good. Go ahead and start the slides, I guess. But that's most of my materials for making it. You can go ahead and advance it. These things, they sell them at fly shops really expensive. Sometimes they're like $7 for 4 of them, but they're basically like these little toys that you pull through your fingers with a string, and they give it like a weird action. Well, I used it for the tail of my flies. You can use it, different tails for them. Go ahead. Here's where I started my thread onto the hook. You can advance. I use bead chains for eyes, for the little eye parts here is really just a bead chain. So you can go ahead and advance. I'm tying it on, and then I give it a little bit of glue to hold it there. You can advance. Depending, you can use different lengths. I found that shorter than like 1.5 inches, it doesn't really give a lot of action, but you can leave the whole thing on there and it'll leave a big long worm for you. Go ahead and advance. I pull off a little bit of the tufts to expose that inner core. Thanks, Zach. And that, go ahead and advance. And then that'll help me to tie that inner core to the hook. And you can catch some of the fibers, that's fine too. Go ahead. For the body, I just use some yarn, whatever color you like. Go ahead. You just tie it on the back. Go ahead and advance. And then you just wrap it around the hook towards the front, advance. And then I spiral up the hook to the front with my thread, and it kind of helps to hold that yarn on there. And then I cut off the extra and go ahead and advance. This is me cutting that craft foam. You can advance another one too. It's 2 mil thick craft foam. They use it for a lot of different stuff. I found a nice big pack of different colors. On this particular fly, I use two layers. Go ahead and advance. And I got a 2-tone effect by doing that. I ended up playing with a whole lot of things with the craft foam. Like on this one, I used a hole punch, and I punched out a whole bunch of little holes, and then glued in the opposite color to help give myself a little polka dot effect.
Nice.
Go ahead and advance. After gluing, cutting it usually about 2.5 inches and give yourself plenty. Go ahead. To get the measurement for the front hole, I just use the hook gap, and I make sure that it's in the center of the foam, and I poke it on through there. You can advance. You can see the hole there, and then I shove that onto the front of the hook and advance. So it sticks on there kind of like that. And then you can advance it. Then I hold it down, I wrap it up, and then I like to give it a couple of drops of super glue on the edges of the foam. I've never had it happen, but the way that the thread is, it seems like it might want to cut the foam because that thread is so tight and skinny. So this makes sure that it's kind of like a solid little area there for you. Go ahead and advance it. I retreat the thread back down to the end so that I can tie the end of the other end of the tail there. Go ahead and advance, which is what I did there. And go ahead. Cut off whatever extra you don't need and advance it. And then cut off your extra thread. And that's pretty much it, I think. Go ahead and advance. Oh yeah, I give myself a couple little drops to reinforce the back end. All right, go ahead. And that's the finished one. And you can advance and then a couple of them. That's the top, that's the bottom. And you can play with the colors and do whatever you'd like. Go ahead and advance. These are some of the other ones that I've done. You can see different lengths, different effects. You can wind lead into it so that they become less buoyant. A lot of these are floating on the top and then they dive as you go, but you can make them so they have neutral buoyancy or that they actually sink, depending on how much weight you want to put onto them. One thing that I will say that a lot of times I'm fishing open water, which has different rules, but with fly fishing, a lot of times they don't want you using flies on a lot of these trout streams that have like spinners or bills on them that give them action, things like that. They want absolutely traditional flies, and this really isn't one of them. So while it's weightless and it counts as a fly, it's definitely hitting a purist confrontation-y kind of a thing. Like people get upset about it. But you can advance it. Yeah, the fish do. I've caught, oh, that's all of them. I've got this little thing. Let's see, I don't know if it'll show it, but this is showing the action of the lure as it goes through. I tried to make a couple of them that, I'm sorry, here it goes. Wait. So you can see how it looks almost like a, I don't know, a eel or a leech, whatever color you'd like, but that tail really does start wagging.
That's really neat.
So yeah, it's kind of fun. I'm kind of proud of it because it's, you know, anyways, my own little idea.
It seems like it's really intricate, all the different steps you have going on. Like, how much time do you think you have invested in each one of them if you did it just like start to finish?
I could probably crank them out at a rate of, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes each, depending on how intricate they are. Like the ones with the polka dots and stuff, I'll make a larger sheet with more polka dots and then cut them all up. So I don't know about that. And plus I'm really just making them for myself. So I make way more than I need, you know, but.
I certainly know nothing about this. I've only seen it done in the movies before, so I'm awfully curious. The process that you're going through there, are there like certain like mechanisms or forms that you're working into that to try and lure a particular fish or kind of fish? Or is it just sort of an experiment to see what they like? I mean, how do you come up with a design?
Well, yeah, it is. Different fish do, you know, they go towards different patterns. But mostly I'm fishing on Fort Loudon, so there's all kinds of fish there. And it's mostly about size. After that, the action of the lure will attract, you know, pretty much everything but a carp, I would guess. And but I've caught a lot of white bass on them and bass. I've even caught some channel catfish on them. So, you know, they appeal to a broad range of fish. But like you're saying, there are little nymph type flies, like, you know, that are more of a trout fly, and depending on the size of the trout that you're going for, yeah, that scale down. And but yeah, different fish do like different things, so depending on what you're going for sure.
Are they pretty reusable, or do they get torn up by the fish quickly?
That depends on the fly. Honestly, these longer tails, they get tore up pretty quick. Sometimes even in casting, I'll lose part of it. but because there's a lot of force when you're chucking it out there. But yeah, they're really resilient.
Hey, Zach is asking what the name of the fixture is that you've used, I think, to hold the thing while you were operating on it.
Oh, okay. It's really a fly vise, they call it, a fly tires vise. There's a little jaw in the front, and when you move the clamp, it has a cam on it, and it pulls the jaw into the, and it closes and clamps onto your hook.
I think a lot of us are thinking about getting one of those right now. That looks like a cool tool just in general.
They're pretty handy. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks a lot for sharing with us. That's neat stuff.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. And closing up the show tonight, we've got David, who's going to show off a $2 RC plane. David?
Good evening. Well,
How are
my
you, sir?
camera should be coming up. I'm doing well. You can go ahead and go to the first slide. Did we get camera here? No,
Not as yet.
I don't see myself. Well, it might be good that way. Well, the camera says it's trying to come up, so we'll let that go. But anyway, you can see what I made my plane out of. This is Dollar Tree foam board. So each one of these sheets is $1, and I got these plans that I use for these planes that I built from a group called Flight Test out of Ohio, and they have free plans to build planes. And so you just use the foam board. This is like you would use for your school projects, your science fair projects, showing off whatever experiment you've done. So it's just $1 for each one of these sheets. And if you'll go to the next slide, we've got a layout of the plans. The plans come in multiple sheets. This plane that I just built this last week was on 18 pages. And so you tape those pages together into, in some cases, it's a couple big panels. This one was one large panel. All 18 sheets got taped together. And then I take and glue, well, I cut out I kind of cut out the pattern. I cut out like big chunks of it and then glue that to poster board so that the poster board then becomes the pattern. And that way I can use it over and over again, build multiple planes. And so what you see here in this picture is the plans that have been glued to the poster board and then cut out from there. So I do the fine cut out after it's glued onto the poster board. So you get the colored plans on there, but they're durable. And in the next slide, you'll see what the different colors mean. The plans, what they give you, have an explanation of how to fold, how to cut. So the dark lines are cut lines, and then the red lines are partially cut lines. So you'd score the first sheet of the paper. The foam board that I'm talking about has a piece of paper on the bottom and then a foam core in there, and then another piece of paper on top. So the red lines you would cut through one of the papers and halfway through the foam, and then but not through the second page. And then the little X marks, those are places where you pull the foam out. And so what they're showing here is the different folds that you can do. Sometimes you're going to fold the sides of the foam core alongside a piece, or sometimes you'll fold it on top of. And so the plans are actually pretty well laid out. And they also do build videos. They have a YouTube channel, and so they do build videos on how to do each one of the planes. In the next slide is a little bit more of that one sheet of paper, and again, just showing some of the details that they give you in the plans. And yes, this is definitely a job for a laser cutter if you have one big enough, the the sheets that I'm working with, the foam board sheets are 20 by 30 inches. And so if you have a laser cutter, which you do, that is large enough to drop it in there, Flight Test also provides a set of plans that are a single sheet, so that if it's a 2-sheet plane, then you can get 2 large PDFs with everything laid out so that you can zap it in your laser cutter and cut it right out. So after the plans are onto the poster board, then I put it onto the foam board and cut it out from there. So I can use the poster board over and over, but it actually comes out of the foam board. I have had a couple of my planes cut out for me by a friend that has a larger laser, and so he's cut them out for me. If you go to the next slide, there you can see the burned parts on this piece. This is one of the what they call their power pod. And this power, what they've tried to do with these plans is tried to make some of the parts interchangeable. So this plane that I just built has the same carriage for the motor and speed controller, electronic speed controller. It's all the same carriage, so I could actually take it from plane to plane without having to build a whole new power pod. But this is one, you can see it's got the B fold on there. And if you fold it in the A fold style, then it won't fit anymore. And so you have to be careful to make sure you put these together in the right orientation. Yeah, Rob, this is a motorized RC plane. So while I say it's a $2 plane, it is $2 because that's all the airframe costs. But there's about, I guess I've got about $60 or $70 worth of electronics in there also. But the nice thing is when I crash this one and destroy it, then I pull all my electronics out and put it in my next $2 plane. So you've got an initial investment, but then it kind of pays for itself over time. In the next slide is the plane that I actually built this last week. This is after the after party last week. I was at Morristown Makers working on a project, and some of y'all saw me cutting out my plane. This is the plane that I was building last week, and it's 2 sheets of foam board, and then all the electronics in there. It's only using 2 servos. This is a design that I've never done this type before. If you know about RC planes, you typically a full RC plane would have 4 channels, and you have your ailerons, your rudder, your elevator, and your throttle. This plane is actually just a 3-channel plane, so I don't have a rudder on it. And the way you get around that is the ailerons give your plane the roll that it needs, and then you play with your elevator to actually bank you around. So you can go with just 3 channels instead of 4. And then I have other planes that are 3 channels, but has a rudder and no ailerons. And so in that case, you're using your elevator and rudder to pull you around, but you can't roll. You can't flip upside down in an easy way, where this plane you can. So it simplifies it when you can do just 3 channels. If you zoom into that blue servo there in the front, you see how it's a single servo, but as it turns left, it pushes the left aileron down and pulls the right aileron up. And then when you go the other direction, so you're using 1 servo to control both control surfaces, which is really clever, instead of having to have even more electronics into it. And so that's, I think it's a clever design. I saw one of these planes a couple weeks ago, and I thought, oh, I need to build one of those. This is one of their earlier designs from Flight Test. And I think this one came from like 2012, 2013. But they're cranking out new designs quite regularly. Some of them are really complicated. This is part of their simpler series of plane. The size of the whole plan, it is, I'm looking at it sitting here beside me. It's about almost 3-foot wingspan, not quite. And then the length of it is about the same. I do have one of the planes that Flight Test has designed that is, it's about a 4.5, 5-foot wingspan. So it's pretty big. In the next slide, you'll see the plane that I had it sitting there at my office today, ready to fly this afternoon. And so I did. I flew it this afternoon, and then I had to bring it home and re-hot glue a few things there. This is the bottom side of the plane, and that's the battery connector there, and then Velcro, where I Velcro the battery on the outside. Of course, the motor's up front, and then let's see. Oh, if you'll go down the fuselage a little bit there, you can stay zoomed in. Do you see the stick that goes right through the middle there? That stick is what holds the fuselage in place. In the firewall of the motor, there's a couple of pins sticking out, and it's a barbecue skewer that you kind of hook onto the front up there at the motor, and then you pull this back and you run that barbecue skewer through it, and that pins it in place. And it's pinned in such a way that you can pop it out and open it up anytime you need to get in there and work at it. So the next slide is, I believe, it's just showing the control surfaces. The next slide, which is the last one, is the guts that are inside the power pod. So you see the motor there on the right, and then the yellow wrapped thing is the electronic speed controller, and it is taking the battery. The battery goes into one side of the electronic speed controller. It splits the battery power out to go to the receiver, which is the thing that says V8FR on it. It gives the receiver power, but it also has the 3 leads that go out to the brushless motor to control it. And so the battery is plugged in the bottom, goes into the speed controller, which then goes out to the receiver and to the motor. And then the receiver has 2 more servos plugged into it, and that would be the 2 servos that you see on the top there. And so that's what controls it. Tim, you say you've looked at their stuff, and they do sell complete build kits. You can just go to their website and say, hey, I want to buy this plane, $25 or whatever, and they'll ship it to you already laser cut, and you just have to put it together. And it's put together with hot glue and a little bit of tape. And then they also sell the power packs, like the motor, the servos that you would need for it. And they tell you which one of their power packs it needs. I sourced all the stuff myself. I bought the foam board at Dollar Tree and bought the motors, and I've got several motors from quads and stuff that I just kind of, okay, yeah, this looks like it's about the right speed that I need to do what I need on this plane. So that's my planes. I've probably got 5 or 6 of them that I've built and destroyed and keep rebuilding. The one that I flew today, which is this one that we've got in the picture, it took there's a saying in RC planes that is a nose heavy plane will fly poorly, a tail heavy plane will fly once, and my plane was tail heavy today. I put my battery a little too far back, and I had trouble keeping it in the air, and then when it came down hard. And but it's back together with a little bit of hot glue and a Band-Aid, and it's back in the air. Tim, yes, they have flying wings there. They have a couple different flying wings that they design. But you can look at their website, Flight Test, FLITETEST. They also have a YouTube channel. So that's my thing.
That's really cool, David. I appreciate you showing us that. If for no reason than because I think you've nerd sniped Rob, so he'll be busy this weekend at least.
That's good. That's good.
Also, I feel like I have to say, all these guts that you're just demonstrating here that make your plane go are the exact same things that make our kill switch combat robots go. So if you can make a plane, you can make a fighting robot and vice versa. So it's cross training for your other interests.
Right. And when we were going to do kill switch last year, I had just gotten kind of into the planes about 6 months before that, and so I have all the equipment and in fact I'm looking at my robot that I had started mocking up for last year before it got canceled. So
Nice.
I'll be ready.
Well, good deal. We'll be looking forward to it. Thanks again, David.
Thank you.
All right, friends, we've got a few announcements to share with you before we conclude this evening. First of all, let me mention that we have a laser authorization class happening on Saturday, May the 1st. I believe that this is sold out already, but if you need laser authorization, go ahead and direct message Tracy and make her feel guilty, and she will probably make a new class slot for you. Just tell her that I sent you. Laser authorization is, of course, key when you want to make airplanes out of foam core board. New member onboarding is coming up on Monday, May the 10th at 7 p.m. That is an optional but respectfully encouraged event for anybody who is a new Knox Makers member who's thinking about becoming a Knox Makers member, or even if you're already a member and you've just never done it before. We'll talk a little bit about how Knox Makers works and why it works that way. So I hope that we will see you there and then. Please hit the website and RSVP if you're interested in coming. Lathe 101 spindle turning. This is happening on Saturday, May the 15th. I believe that the inimitable Tim will be teaching this one. The lathe classes have proven very popular, and this one I'm sure will as well. So if you're interested in learning more about using the lathe, I would recommend that you apprentice yourself to Tim in this class. As always, you may, of course, obtain tickets to these things at knoxmakers.org/events. Of course, we hope, we believe that June the 8th is going to be our first return to an in-person Tuesday night show and share. We are closely watching what's going on with the health director and the recommendations coming to us regarding the COVID situation. But it is our hope that we may be able to go ahead and come back to the shop collectively on the 8th. So reserve the date and let's hope that we can make that happen. To remind you once more, if you have content that you would like to include in next week or future show and share, you can get in touch with Tracy or John Dale, or you can email sas@knoxmakers.org, and we'll be delighted to include your project and learn all about it. Knox Makers is a pure nonprofit organization. We subsist entirely on member dues and class fees. We can also be benefited by your donations, of course. If you would like to help support Knox Makers and its mission, one thing you can do is to utilize the Amazon Smile program. If you're buying all of your worldly goods from Amazon already, you can designate Knox Makers as your charity of choice, and we will get a hay penny every time you order something. Alternatively, you can go to knoxmakers.org/donate and give us money directly, which would also be quite delightful. This concludes the programming for this evening, and once the recording stops, we will progress into the open chat section.